When I realized I needed to get the word out, but I didn't feel I could do it. I'm a nobody. I can't do this. So I gave up on that, and I decided to lead levees.org for the reason lots of great things get done. No one else was going to do it.
I feel like there's two things that you would doubt yourself. How did you get past that doubt of considering yourself to be the one to carry through this message? You know that feeling when you know something is wrong and staying quiet is no longer an option? My guest today is Sandy Rosenthal, founder of levees.org. After Hurricane Katrina, Sandy went from ordinary citizen to leading a movement that challenged the story of why New Orleans flooded. This conversation is about courage, self-doubt, and why taking action often starts before you feel ready. Sandy, I am pumped to have this conversation with you because, as I was mentioning it to you before, your story is somewhat of a David and Goliath story, and I want you to get into it a little bit because your nonprofit organization, levees.org, based in New Orleans, started because of something very, very catastrophic. So I wanted you to start there about what your company is and how it got started.
Okay, well, as you already mentioned, it was a catastrophe, unprecedented. When the flooding happened in New Orleans, no one even knew how to spell the word levees. Now, the levees had broken. Everyone was spelling it wrong, or they asking, what are levees? We were so blindsided that everybody, leadership, everyone. And when you're blindsided, of course, the response is very slow and haphazard, and books are written on that subject. But one thing that did happen, I discovered something about myself that it turned up I'm a leader and didn't know it. And that's often you'll see that in the case of huge disasters, huge catastrophes. People find out there's a leader in them that they didn't know about. In my particular case, when I realized I needed to get the word out about the flooding and the real cause of it. Everybody was being told that Katrina was a huge storm and that all of New Orleans is below sea level, and neither of those things are true. I needed to get the word out, but I didn't feel I could do it. I'm a nobody. I don't have any engineering experience. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a speaker. I'm not any of these things. I can't do this. So I spent some time trying to find somebody else to lead the movement, to get the word out. And I thought, I know, this is how silly I was. I thought, let me get Ellen DeGeneres. She lives in Louisiana. Maybe she'll lead this. Well, I found out how hard it is to get in contact with a celebrity. It's very, very difficult or impossible to get in touch with a celebrity. So I gave up on that, and I decided to lead levees.org for the reason lots of great things get done. No one else was going to do it. Meaning, I'm going to have to do it. And I said, well, I'll do it. I'll start this organization to get the word out. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep looking for a celebrity or looking for somebody else to take my place. Well, obviously, that didn't happen. I'm still the leader. I'm still out there pushing the message. And even though our message is largely accomplished, our mission is largely accomplished, there's always work to be done. And I'm on to other things, and we'll discuss that later. But that's how it started, because if I didn't do it, no one was going to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I commend you. Obviously, Hurricane Katrina was a massive event. I know it was local to New Orleans, but globally, it was well known, especially how it was handled and how it was managed. You know, there was a lot of stories that came out after that. Some of you just alluded to. Now, considering you were in the epicenter of this event, and thinking about the task and the dauntingness of this, how did you position yourself? How did you get to the point where you felt you can be the person that would lead this whole information, boost around levees and really bring attention to the structure that was, not working as well as people thought it was?
In the very beginning, I didn't truly understand how big the big guys were. And in this case, the big guys is the federal government, or more specifically, the Army Corps of Engineers. those are the people responsible for the levees that fell over like matchsticks on the day that Katrina's surge arrived. New Orleans hadn't had a hurricane in 40 years. And it was when that storm surge hit those levees, they just flopped over. In some cases, levees fell over on both sides. Like you'd have a canal. In some cases, they fell over on both sides. That's a testament to how weak these walls were. Walls that we had paid for them, with our tax dollars, and we thought we were protected. And for your listeners, when you drive over a federal bridge, a federal interstate bridge, you're not worried the bridge is going to break. It's the federal government built it. You trust the things that the federal government builds. You trust their dams, their bridges, and their buildings. Well, anyway, we were all caught off guard, and that's the people I had to stand up against and fight was the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers with huge, deep pockets of money, the taxpayer money, and it was. When I think back, I'm a little surprised at myself that I kept going. But all I had to do was look around me. Everyone I know lost their home. If they didn't lose their home, they lost their place where they work. And many of them actually lost loved ones. There were almost 1,400 people drowned. So all I had to do was look around, and that was my resolve. I had to keep going. But in the very beginning, I didn't realize quite how big it was. It was more that something had to be done, and if no one else is going to do it, I guess I have to do it.
What was the first challenge? Was it external challenges with moving this forward, or was it more internal challenges, the stories you were telling yourself?
Believe it or not, the first very unexpected challenge was from people who live here were actually against the message I was trying to put out there, which is this is the fault of the federal government. It was too difficult for people to wrap their heads around that the federal government could have messed up so bad. And people preferred to believe this was the hurricane, or preferred to believe that it was local officials that were asleep at the wheel, or preferred to believe that it's because New Orleans is below sea level. People couldn't wrap their heads around that this is the fault of the federal government, especially since at the same time that I was launching levees.org, the federal government had launched its own disinformation campaign about me and my work, which I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about because it's a pretty key thing.
It sounds like ignorance is bliss for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And there's safety in knowing that these huge institutions are taking care of us. And when somebody signals the alarm and says, wait a second, these huge institutions are not as fit or as adequate as we think they are, then obviously that one lone voice is going to take on a lot of scrutiny. And that scrutiny is either going to make that person walk away, or it's going to make that person drive ahead forward. Mm-hmm. What was the decision for you in that point? How did you choose that decision to keep going forward?
I'm so glad you asked that question. It's been 20 years since I launched levees.org. Believe it or not, Hurricane Katrina was a little more than 20 years ago. You know what pushed me? The idea that there were people out there and groups out there publicly disparaging me. And here I am, a nobody. I wasn't a council person. I wasn't a senator. I was a nobody. So why would so much time and energy be spent on defaming me if I'm a nobody? What if I'd gone out on the street and said the earth is flat? That I would have been ignored, but I wasn't being ignored here. And that's when I knew that either I was 100% right or certainly on the right track. And that's what propelled me forward, the initial pushback that I got from all kinds of places, not just locally and people that I thought would get on board and be on my side, but also from like engineering organizations and engineers were actually disparaging me. And that is the reason for that is another chapter that we can talk about another time. But I was getting pushback everywhere. I didn't stop. I kept going because I believed in my heart that what I was doing was right.
Mm-hmm. Most people, when they get pushback, they usually fold. And I would say most people who fold typically don't have enough information. They're just saying things for the sake of saying things. They may believe it, but they may not have any facts or evidence to prove it. What was your foundation to continue pushing forward and showing people, wait a second, the information that I have is actually something you need to pay attention to?
I'm really glad you asked that. You need to have the data on your side. You need to have the evidence on your side. And so often it's right there in front of you. All you have to do is read. Just read. That's something so few people do. So early on, just shortly after the levees broke and the flooding, I was reading, I managed to get my hands on some testimony that had been presented. There's all kinds of congressional hearings after a catastrophe, always, okay? And so I read one that spelled out very clearly that the Army Corps designs and builds our flood protection, and the local interests maintain them after they're built. Well, I knew that the levees were only 5 years old. And if a brand new building fell to the ground, you don't blame the janitor. You blame the architect and the contractor. And in the case of levees, the Army Corps of Engineers is both of those. There's my proof. I tucked that under my arm and I went, this is not our fault, and started screaming from the rooftops. And that's when the pushback began. And this was about a month after Hurricane Katrina.
What was the pushback that you were getting?
Well, mainly people saying, no, you're wrong. And I'm going to give you the moment that I decided to start levees.org. I was talking to a gentleman in Louisiana who lived about 2 hours from New Orleans. And I told him what I just told you, that this is the fault of the federal government. And he said, oh, no, the levees were perfect. The reason New Orleans flooded is because Katrina was a huge storm. Huge. And you know what? People like you don't deserve help. You shouldn't have been living there. Okay? He actually said that to my face. And I went home and told my husband about it and said, I have to do something. I said, something needs to be done. What this guy said is wrong, and I need to get the word out, because here he is. He lives in Louisiana, and he believes that. Well, what if you lived in Toronto? Or Vancouver, or Maine, or California? They don't know, and they need to know. And as naive as it sounds, I decided here I was, I'm going to change that. And I want to point something out to your listeners. It turns out that in most situations like mine, the people who stand up and scream blue murder and don't stop are usually people who are not experts in the field. In my case, the people who are engineers did not stand up. And the people who are in that field do not, and that's usually how it works. Someone outside the field who can't be blacklisted, can't be threatened, and those are the people like myself who are the most likely to stand up. Now, I got publicly lambasted and publicly, disparaged, but they couldn't threaten me. Nobody can threaten me. And then the little thing I tucked under my pillow before I went to sleep, of course I had doubts. Of course I did. But what I told myself, well, if I'm wrong, I'll just say, oops, I'm sorry. But there's no downside. What if I'm wrong? And besides, I didn't think I was. Mm-hmm. I kept waiting for the truth to jump out behind a tree, or some sort of truth that was different from my narrative of the events. It never came. People kept telling me it was coming, including the Army Corps of Engineers. Mm-hmm. Oh, you'll see, the information will come out. You'll see. We can't tell you now. You'll see. It'll come out. Of course, it never did. That's a sign. If someone says I can't tell you why you're wrong, it's because you'll find out later. That there's a name for that, but I can't say that on the radio.
Listening to you right now, Sandy, I feel like there's two things that you would doubt yourself with, and I'm thinking from my own perspective. I would either doubt the information that I have, or I would doubt, am I the person to carry this message? Mm-hmm. You obviously sound like you were very confident with the information that you had. Mm-hmm. Check. How did you get past that doubt of considering yourself to be the one to carry through this message?
There's a name for this now. It's called imposter syndrome, and I hope it's something most people don't ever feel. But how did I get past that? That I could be wrong. I think the answer to your question is I was one of the lucky ones. My house didn't flood. My husband's business didn't flood. My son's school didn't flood. And when we evacuated for Hurricane Katrina, my husband, who was an insurance agent for 30 years, told me to pack for 3 weeks. He said, we're not coming home for 3 weeks, because he had seen what had happened when Hurricane Andrew went through Florida. So I packed for 3 weeks. I think I'm the only person in New Orleans who packed for 3 weeks. So I was in a unique position. I was uniquely positioned to read the news, watch the news, and listen to the news. And that empowered me with all that data and information it gave me. And so when it came time for me to do something I'd never done before, a live interview on a local TV station, all I had to think to myself is, this is a walk in the park compared to the horror that so many people had been through, losing everything, the suicide rate. I didn't include that in the 1,400 people I already mentioned. There was suicides. People lost everything after this catastrophe. So I think that empowered me, knowing that I was one of the lucky ones, and I like I had a duty.
Mm-hmm. I hear what you're saying. It sounds like the environment was so unbearable that weight of it alone was the motivation that you needed to keep going, regardless of what you felt about yourself. It sounds like that level of servitude and impacting others and making sure that this didn't happen again was a huge inspiration for you and kept you going. What were some of the tactical steps you took in the beginning? Because I'm sure it wasn't just you speaking out and saying, there's a problem here, but you had to have a strategy behind that.
In general terms, for your listeners, the first thing one has to do is create a community. Nobody can do anything valuable or important alone. Impossible. Those who have tried have failed. You have to have a community if you're trying to do anything big and important. In my case, I need to remind your listeners that this was 20 years ago. We didn't have YouTube. YouTube was fledgling. Facebook, fledgling. We didn't have TikTok. And even if there was social media, they were fledgling, and most people didn't either didn't know, never heard of it, or had heard of it and didn't know how to use it. Twitter, was fledgling. I don't think Twitter was out yet in 2005. Excuse me. So I did it the old-fashioned way: email. My son had just a few weeks prior to the launch of levees.org recommended to me to switch from AOL to Gmail. Thank goodness I did, because AOL does not have the bells and whistles you need. And so the first thing I did was I sent an email to all my family and friends saying, will you join me in getting out the word that this was a federal mistake and therefore we deserve funding to rebuild? That was that was the main reason for us doing this. Only the federal government could send us the assistance we needed. The whole city flooded. So I sent it out to my family and friends, and overnight, 200 people had signed on to support me in this effort to get the word out, the truth out about the flooding of New Orleans. And 200 people is a lot, even by today's standards. 200 people overnight saying, I'll follow you. You be my leader. I'm with you. And that's what I did. And then what springs from that is once you get 200 supporters, well, then you get help in the form of, like, one of those supporters might be an attorney, or one of them might be an engineer, or one of them might be a PR expert. And they'll come to you and say, if you need any PR assistance, I'm your gal, or I'm your guy. Just let me know. But again, it all comes back to creating a community. Nobody can do anything alone.
What do you think was the key reason the community came together for you based on that email?
keep in mind that, again, it was 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, and I did speak to, I spoke out of a vacuum of leadership. Leadership wasn't really very strong in New Orleans right after Hurricane Katrina. I can't think of anyone who will stand out as a leader in those 6 months. And it was really grassroots groups that came to the forefront. There were others besides mine. And so that was part of the reason that I got such a great response because of this vacuum of leadership. And someone was stepping forward to be a leader. Great, I'll follow you. But I think the other reason that I was able to get so much support is the federal government was very slow to respond. We did not get our first lump of money set aside for rebuilding until 9 months later. 9 months. We were floundering for 9 months. All we had was our FEMA money, which was not enough, of course, and our savings and our insurance. That's it. We were floundering.
It always takes one person, I find, to galvanize a few people, and then from there you galvanize more people. At what point did you start to see the momentum? And what were you telling yourself during that time? Was this getting too big for you, or did you feel this is perfect?
I wanted to mention that even though I did get 200 people overnight, you don't have to have 200. That's how many I got when I did this. But even a handful is a community. Even a handful. You don't have to have, I don't want your listener to think, oh, well, I can't get 200 supporters behind me. You don't need 200. You just need a handful, literally, and to get started, and more will come. Okay, but then moving on to when did I realize this was getting really large and the momentum is really going? I think the day I realized I was really getting somewhere is when one of our state senators, of course you only have two of those, agreed to sign our petition that we had created asking President Bush to keep his promise and build the levees back stronger. And he was our 200th signer of our petition. And we got photographs of it and everything. Did I say 200? I meant to say 2,000, a 2,000th supporter of our petition. I'm glad I caught myself on that. And that big moment, that made me feel like, wow, we're on the map now. But, you don't have to get big famous names and celebrities. If you can get a celebrity, great. If you can get a senator, great. But don't ever stop yourself by saying, I don't have a celebrity. I don't have big names. You don't need them. Are they nice? Yeah. But if you can't get one, keep going.
So part of your strategy, you said, is to start with community. And I'm thinking, okay, I start with community, but at this point, I'm still going against this huge institution called the federal government. Now, no matter how many people I have behind me, people are following me because I'm leading them to an outcome that I myself am passionate about and determined to achieve. Strategically, though, what did the logistics look like for you to get to that destination? Because it's great that you have the followers in the community, but now people are asking you, Sandy, okay, how do we get there?
Okay. It's really critical to have a mission and say, what is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? And you stick with it and don't deviate from it ever. And if you go to look at our website that we have now and look at our website from 20 years ago, it's the same mission statement. Okay, that's critical. And you be crystal clear about what your goal is and what you're trying to accomplish. Our mission is education on why New Orleans flooded, because the survivors deserve it. Okay, but then you've got goals, and one of our first goals, and you want to set something that has a clear. You want to select something that has a clear evidence that you've gotten there. In this case, we were pushing to get a bill passed called the 829 Commission, which would be a truly independent investigation of why the levees flooded. Your listeners may not know that the organization tasked by Congress to do the investigation was the Army Corps itself. the people who built the levees. What do you think they're going to find? And it's not the first time that's happened in history where the people that built something are tasked to investigate it. Crazy, crazy. Why more people didn't scream in defiance? What's the word? Why didn't scream in protest? The only reason I can think of is because the very people who would scream in protest are busy trying to figure out, where am I going to live? Where am I going to work? Where are my kids going to go to school? So they're too busy with life's basics to scream and protest about that investigation. But again, remember I told you I didn't flood. My kids' school didn't flood. I knew where my next paycheck was coming from. And so that's one of the reasons that I was able to put this group together and keep it together and keep driving that mission. And we're still going on today.
What did it cost you personally?
Oh, my goodness. Well, all my time. All my time. I ended up quitting my part-time job. I was at a point in my life where I could work part-time. I've earned the ability to work part-time. Again, this is 2005, not the world of today where you can work from home. And so I quit my full-time job, and most people take vacations. I did put personal money into this organization, but most of the money was raised through donations. There are a lot of people that can't put their face and their name out there for whatever reason, but they can send money. Thank goodness.
And that's that's good. Anonymous donors are always great, just as much as very obvious ones. Were there moments where you wanted to stop?
Oh my gosh. It took longer than I thought it would take, and it was harder than I thought it would be. But I've spoken with other nonprofit leaders who've done huge things, and they all say the same thing. Yeah, took longer than I thought, was harder than I thought, but it was still worth every minute. And anything that's worth doing is never easy. If it's really worth it and if it's really important. But yes, I doubted it. Yes, I got tired. And you know what I would do? I would go take the dog for a walk, or call up a friend and say, "Would you like to go play some tennis?" I over and over again, physical exercise really turns big problems into small ones.
It's outrageous to me to think about the enormity of the situation that you were faced with and the institution that you were fighting against, and to think the only thing you needed was to go for a walk with your dog.
It certainly worked for me. And self-care. I think it's not just a little exercise, but self-care. I learned that I had to do something for myself every day, even if it was something like, I've got dry hair, conditioning my hair, okay? Just something for myself each day, because if I had neglected myself, that would have been deleterious. It would have been bad for the organization. So self-care, exercise, and also just girlfriend time. In my case, friends time or family time. Those were critical.
And the reason why I bring that up in kind of like almost like this absurd comparison is because it's those small things. We forget about those small things when we're taking on these huge missions that are beating us up, that are taking a lot out of us. And we kind of think in our minds that, okay, what do we need to do to kind of keep ourselves going? And we overlook those small things, those things like self-care, going for a walk, hanging out with friends and family members, knowing that on the other side of your life, you're dealing with this huge thing. So how did it not interfere with the things that you umbrella under self-care? Because I could imagine when you're hanging out with your friends, you must have talked about this. Your name was all over the news. You're this local person, this galvanizer. So it's kind of like, how did you separate?
I think part of that is compartmentalization. Put it aside, and that takes practice. That's not something everybody can. There's some people that can't do it, cannot compartmentalize. and I feel kind of sorry for them. But taking it and putting it aside and recognizing that, as I mentioned already, exercise, family time. I didn't mention prayer. For a lot of the world, prayer. And the other thing was the exercise, and doing those things is critical to self-help, self-care, and critical to keeping going. And then if I can't, well, there goes the organization with it. And whose fault is that? It's mine.
Mm-hmm. At what point did you know when you were going through this advocacy, did you know it was working? There must have been a point or a day or maybe a moment where you realized this is working. I'm getting through. I'm having an impact. This institution is going to come through for us.
I think the answer is when I started seeing our mantras. We had mantras. It's the core. It's what was? Excuse me. It's the levee, stupid. Okay, that was not one of them. I'm not happiest about, but that came out of my organization. It's the levee, stupid. Or seeing things like stop using Katrina shorthand. When I say the word Katrina shorthand, that means blaming the hurricane for the flooding, and the hurricane may have been the trigger that made the levees fall over, but the levees were wrongly built, and it was not a natural event, a Mother Nature event. It was a humanly caused event. And so we put out the term, stop Katrina shorthand. And when I started seeing our mantra show up in places where I knew our organization had nothing to do with it, it's when I saw it taking off on its own. That was a really, really good feeling. It took a little while. I would say it took about a good year for that to happen. But when it developed a momentum of its own, and I would see and hear things that I know I had nothing to do with. And it's a good feeling.
Mm-hmm. What did you learn about the difference between being loud versus being effective?
I had good advice on that. From the very beginning, I was told by an advisor who had worked on the Hill in Washington, D.C. He said, be careful to keep your voice calm. He said, if you're trying to work with Congress or get a bill passed, the moment you get shrill and start using language that is inflammatory, they'll shut you down. And that was good advice. And it's also good advice, though, but even with ordinary people, you don't have to be a senator, a cabinet member to be, impressed with staying calm, never being inflammatory, never being insulting in any way. Stick to the facts, and it's a great way to get respect. And then also, if someone says something truly insulting, just laugh. Yeah. Just because if they're going to debase themselves to using insulting words, well, it's bad for them and it's kind of funny for me.
I want to dig into that, what you just said there, because when most people are aware that it's the institution's fault, now the institution is made up of people, and all people have feelings, egos, all those emotions. So when the institution is being attacked, those people within those institutions are feeling attacked. So, and I totally understand not going in there and pointing fingers and blowing things up, and I totally believe that makes sense. So what was your approach? How did you make this institution take responsibility for something without making them feel irresponsible?
This was a difficult thing. It took me a good 10 years to really, really understand this as well as I do now. That when you're dealing with, let's say the Army Corps of Engineers, and there were actual people. There's an actual colonel. There were actual PR people with the Corps that I actually had to do face-to-faces with. I had to remind myself that if it wasn't Ken Holder in PR or Colonel Autain, who is the colonel, it would be someone else. It has nothing to do with them, okay? You have to remind yourself of that. If it wasn't Colonel Autain or Mr. Holder, it'd be somebody else in those positions, in those jobs. And it's not about them. It's about the issue. And there's the flip side of that coin is I know that to them, I'm just another person. And that if it wasn't Sandy, it would be Mary. And you let it go. Let the personal feelings go. It's about the issue. Stick to the issue. And you stick to the issue and you will get there. But the moment the insults start, the moment any personal talk begins, it means they've lost track of that. It's not the person, it's the issue.
So I'm going to ask you to dig in your memory because I would love to hear a verbal example of that. So I love what you're saying. It's about separating the person from the issue. I'm a firm believer in that. When people do wrong to me, I don't call them out on being that type of person. I call them out on what you did or what you said made me feel a certain way versus attacking the person as if they embody this entire thing. So I love what you said there. So what would be an example when you're standing at Capitol Hill and you're in front of all these lawmakers? What would be an example of you approaching the issue and removing them as people from it?
Okay. I think the best strategy in this case is to give your adversary information they didn't know. Okay, that always makes you look smart. Okay, stay calm. Give them data that they didn't know, and then thank them for pointing something out that you hadn't thought about before. And no one minds. Everybody likes hearing something new that they didn't know before. Like, oh, I didn't know that there were 10,000 miles of levees. But like I said, it's three things. Like, give them data that they didn't know, and then thank them for sharing with you their thoughts, even if they're ugly, thank them for letting you know that you're thinking about this, and do it with a smile.
Mm-hmm. And how did this? And did you have levees.org?
I can give you an example. Maybe an example would be good. So I was recently asked, how should all of Louisiana be protected from flooding? Okay. Which is a kind of a ridiculous question. I'm a little nonprofit, but this is what I said. I said, the Army Corps of Engineers spends about $1 billion a year working on fixing that problem, on solving that problem, and the local levee authority spends about $70 million a year working on that problem. So. I'm flattered that you thought that my little nonprofit with no income stream and run by volunteers, I'm really flattered that you thought I could answer a question like that. No, really, I'm flattered. Okay? So I've given them data, okay, and even though they've just asked a ridiculous question that's designed to make me be defensive, okay, they didn't put me on the defensive, and then I thanked them for flattering me. Okay, but that providing data is critical. Just give them something they likely didn't know.
That takes an incredible amount of emotional intelligence. Like
Took
you
me
have
a
to
while. I ought to have this data by now. I said, and right when, and for people just getting started that are worried that they don't have all the data at their fingertips, don't worry, just ask questions. It'll come.
When you say it took you a while, I'm going to assume you're talking about just getting to that point where you can where you can have the humility to be able to have these conversations in a way where you don't get inflamed. What was that journey to getting to that point like? Because for a lot of people, they stay within that emotion and it's hard for them to get out of it.
Yeah, trial and error. I can think of 2 different instances where I lost my cool, and I didn't shout or anything like that, but I obviously had lost my cool and had gotten defensive. And in both cases, I had not gotten enough sleep the night before, and it was too much on my plate. And I learned a lesson. There are times when I get asked to do an interview, a live interview at 6 a.m. I should maybe just say, sorry, I can't. Because I know I haven't had enough sleep. I know that I've got too much on my plate. And so I made a mistake on a live radio show and was lambasted all over the. This is back in 2005 where anonymous commenting was allowed. Okay, now it's not. They'll find out what your account is and shut you down now. But this is in the Wild West days. And then there was another case. I was in an interview, a press conference actually, and got asked a question that was designed to put me on the defensive, and it did. Again, I didn't totally flub the response, but I was not happy with my composure. And I learned, I learned, why you need to stay composed, why you can't ever lose it, because that'll give your opponent, for lack of a better word, the big guys, that'll give them a hook, and they'll be all over it. And expect that. If you're out there trying to make the world a better place, expect it. There will be criticism. It's going to come, but it also means you're making a difference. Because if you were out there saying the world is flat, no one would pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot. It sounds like you had to deal with some gaslighting. And how did you respond to that? Obviously, there's moments where you kind of had a fluff, and there's moments where you probably held your ground, and composure came over time. And I think that's where I'm thinking a lot of times it's challenging battling institutions, because you feel they have so much more information, so much more influence, so much more power than you do, that any response they provide you is almost like, how do I rebut? Or how do I stay calm? Is there a way to prepare yourself for having great rebuttals in moments where they throw information at you that you don't have, or when you feel you're being gaslit?
Again, as I did already mention, often these questions are designed to put you on the defensive, and don't let them do it. I've had colleagues of mine with levies.org. I've had to tell them afterward, don't ever apologize. Number one, don't apologize for anything. Provide that data, and even if they might already know it, it's a good time to repeat it. There may be people listening who don't know about this data that you have. And it's easy to get data. Just read, as I mentioned earlier. Just read. It's there. Your opponent don't expect you to read. Mm-hmm. It blows their minds when they find out you've actually read something that's out there. You'd be surprised how often information is totally available at a fingertip. People don't bother to look. Staying calm, never raising your voice. Just it's easy to tell yourself that, and remembering, being flattered. If someone is out there to make you look bad, you should be flattered by it, because you know what that is: free information. When somebody, if I'm criticized for doing something, if someone finds fault with something I've written or something I've said, it's free advice. Mm-hmm. I don't have to pay for it, and they might be right. They in fact, a lot of the information that's come my way, which was designed to be criticism, actually helped me see something I'd missed before. So regard criticism as free advice, because remember what I said earlier, Dwayne. It's not personal. So they're out there. I'm not taking it personally. So even though they may intend to be criticizing me personally, since I'm not, I'm like, oh, they just made me think of something I hadn't thought about before. And I'll give you a little plug for my book. The climax of my book was when I realized that somebody who was criticizing me gave me information that I'd missed for years, and it turned into really what the book is about. Someone who was intending to make me look bad. Don't you love it? Free advice.
It's a good spin. I love how you spin that and how you take that in. And obviously these are things that you've learned throughout this journey. Yeah. So with levies.org, what have you accomplished? What are you proud of with those accomplishments?
Two main things. The first main thing is that there was a civil engineer who was given wrong information during the investigative part of all this. The levees are all fixed now. But while investigations was going on, a big name, his name is J. David Rogers, was given information that blamed locals for the flooding. Okay? And he put that in his investigative report that came out in 2006. Turned up the later studies came out, including the Army Corps of Engineers itself, wrote, no, this was a failure of the system to perform as designed. Okay? 5 studies later. So that same J. David Rogers understood he made a mistake because it kind of threw the people of New Orleans under the bus. Made us feel like we're responsible because of our local officials were asleep at the wheel. So he wrote a new paper. It was published in in a journal called Water Policy, the official journal of the World Water Council, published in 2015, and the New York Times did a front page Sunday above the fold story about this study. Ever since then, all major media, Boston Globe, the Los Angeles Times, all of these, Houston Chronicle, all the majors stopped saying that the local New Orleanians were responsible for the flooding and pinned it where it belonged, the Army Corps of Engineers. That was big. That was 2015. And then one more thing happened. I'm sure some of your listeners may know what a style guide is. The New York Times has a style guide. The Associated Press has a style guide. This is an actual, I wonder if I have a copy here. I don't have a copy right in front of me, but this is a podcast anyway. But it's an actual, like an encyclopedia that whenever a journalist wants to write, so let's say 9/11, there's actual ways you refer to 9/11. You don't call it the Twin Tower disaster. It has a certain name. Well, in 2022, the Associated Press issued a change to their style guide, and it told all of their reporters all over the world, whenever you talk about the flooding of New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, you must mention levee failure, which was the proximate cause of the flooding. And depending on what you're writing about, even go into more detail on whose fault that is, depending on the story. To get a style guide change is almost unheard of. And you got one guess why that style guide change happened. It's because our organization pushed for it. We went to the Associated Press and said it needs to be done, and they did. Hopefully, New York Times is next. That's next on the list. But those two things, that journal article in 2015 and that style guide change, so in 2022, those are the 3 main big accomplishments that are directly due to levees.org, to the work of levees.org. Meanwhile, we've moved on to other things. Right now, we want for every single engineering school in the country, there's 200 of them plus, we want all of them to, in their programs for engineering students, to have information on failures and lessons learned. Because right now it's not standard procedure.
Wow, that's incredible. You've done a lot of great work. What has been your biggest lesson looking back at this experience?
I think there's a lot, but I think a really big one is when you decide, when you have selected your mission, and once you've crafted what you want to say it louder and longer. That's my mistake I did. I should have been louder, and louder not meaning literally louder. I mean literally, getting in people's faces, getting out there, and longer. Because I was right from the very beginning, and I had that self-doubt. I had all that criticism being lobbed at me, and it probably slowed me down and made me a little softer, and I might have stopped talking a little sooner. I didn't give up entirely, of course, even though I was tempted. So just stick with it, and what's the worst that could happen? It turns out you were wrong, just say, oops, my bad. But I doubt it. Once you've made the decision to move forward, you are 99.9% likely right.
And talking about that decision to move forward, what would you say to somebody listening who is going through something that they know is wrong, but are telling themselves that I'm not the person to challenge this?
Okay, that's a very understandable reaction. And what I would say is these big guys, and let's say it's a homeowners association, which you'd be surprised how many people are being made miserable by HOAs. But let's say it's a homeowners association. Okay, actually, I'm going to pick something else. Let's say you're a pork production factory in Virginia. Okay, these things are huge. Okay, they and they have a lot of power. They're big organizations. These bacon makers, huge organizations. And let's say they are your foe, your big guys you're trying to deal with. Just treat them like they're the bully on the fourth grade playground. So let's talk about this. So what is a bully on the fourth grade playground? Well, they're big. They're always big. They're never tiny little pukes, little things, pipsqueaks. They're big. Okay. Well, what else are they? They're not smarter than you are. In fact, they're very, very likely not as smart as you are. So they're big and they're not too smart. But because they're big, they're arrogant. And what do arrogant people do? Make big mistakes. And you just be watching, and they're going to make that mistake, and you be ready. And when they do make that mistake, you pick up the phone or email or text, and you call the local TV station and say, "Look at this," because you've just caught them in a mistake. But remember, they're just like anybody who hasn't been homeschooled knows exactly what a fourth grade bully is on the playground. They're everywhere. And that's all these big guys are. They're just big and not too smart.
Well said, Sandy. Is there anything in our conversation today that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about?
I think we did a really good job of touching on really my most important points: the big guys in the playground, how to deal with questions that are intended to throw you off kilter. They're intended to make you feel defensive. Never show a shred of defensiveness. You have nothing to be defensive about, nothing to apologize about. For heaven's sakes, you're leading a movement, to make the world a better place. Why apologize? Okay? So yes, I think I feel very good about how much we covered in a very short period of time.
Definitely. Very great words, Sandy. And this is the part of the conversation where I turn it to the guest to read their letter to their former self.
When you feel doubt, take a breath. When you feel tired, take a nap. But when you feel discouraged, just remember that not only are you going to make the world a better place, you can do it even if it's from your own backyard.
That's amazing. You have made a very huge impact, not only in New Orleans, but I'm sure in a lot of other areas. So your reach is very vast and very impactful. So I commend you for the work that you're doing. And thank you. Thank you for sharing your story today.